He knocked the ice off his gun and turned to take out 2 German soldiers. In the icy wilderness, he lost one of his shoes. To survive, he had to keep running, with German soldiers close behind. One of his toes was shot off, and blood splattered onto the snow. Without time to think, he got up and ran again. Out of the 12 companions, he was the only one who hadn't been captured. If he were caught, the secret plan would be ruined. He was driven to the seaside by soldiers and suddenly realized that his blood trail would make escape impossible. The soldiers followed the blood trail to the sea but lost their target. By then, Jan had crossed a mountain and shaken them off. That night, he took off his shoes and, enduring the pain, wrapped his injured foot in a sock. The Germans hadn't given up searching and fired multiple flares to light up the night sky. With the Germans in sight, Jan had no choice but to hoof it. This time, he decided to take the risk and swim across the icy channel. The officer felt the cold water and thought Jan would surely die here, but Jan had already crossed the channel and reached the other side. He dragged his nearly frozen body and was rescued by a young couple. A kind family took him in for the night. The officer reported that all 12 had been captured, but the strict lieutenant colonel thought that the one who had run away must still be alive. He ordered a thorough search of families with medical capabilities. No one escaped his grasp. Early the next morning, Jan set off again to rescue his companions. Meanwhile, his comrades were enduring severe torture in the hospital.
Sag mir, wo ist.
As the colonel conducted experiments, he made Jan's companions enter the water to record how long they could last, to determine if the escapee could survive swimming across the channel. But the first 2 couldn't last at all. The colonel decided to test it himself, unwilling to let anyone escape his grasp. Entering the cold water, he realized he couldn't last long but still refused to believe the 12th man was dead. That night, the 11 men were executed by the colonel. Jan arrived at a friend's house as directed by the kind family. The lady of the house was a nurse who informed him of his comrade's fate. Jan had to change his plan to flee to Sweden and then to England. He found someone he could trust, and they thoughtfully prepared new shoes for him and sent him by boat to another coast on his way to Sweden. The boat couldn't get close to the shore, so a strong man jumped into the icy water to carry Jan ashore. The story is set in defeated Norway during World War II, with Jan and his companions being British-trained saboteurs. The original plan was to launch a sabotage program called Red Martin on the German port of embarkation in Norway. Unfortunately, a contact issue caused their plan to fail, resulting in the capture of 11, with only Jan escaping. The colonel hadn't found the 12th man yet, and his report still unsubmitted. He changed 11 to 12 and could only believe the 12th man died in the icy water. After days of traveling, Jan reached a German-occupied camp, a necessary route for him. The closer to danger, the safer he felt. But his skiing skills were lacking. Jan accidentally fell and hit a nearby car. The colonel was coincidentally at the camp. Jan kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, but the colonel called out to him.
Ich dachte, der Norweger kommt als Skifahren.
Luckily, the colonel didn't recognize him, and Jan thanked him before leaving anxiously. But as the colonel prepared to return to his room, he suddenly realized that the odd behavior of the man could mean he was the 12th escapee. As Jan was skiing away, a fighter plane flew overhead. The fighter began circling him, and Jan realized his identity was exposed. He quickly changed direction, desperately trying to escape. The fighter locked onto him and attacked without hesitation. Jan dodged the bullets with his body movements. The fighter turned again, and Jan needed to reach the downhill slope quickly, or he'd be a sitting duck. Though he dodged the bullets, the intense gunfire triggered an avalanche. Jan lost a ski pole, using all his strength to escape, but he was eventually swallowed by the avalanche. The pilot withdrew after seeing this. He reported to the colonel that if the target survived, there were only 3 routes down the mountain. The colonel wouldn't let him escape this time. Jan was still alive but severely injured by the avalanche. His face was covered in blood, his fingernails flipped off, and he was accompanied by a severe concussion. He struggled out of the snow pit. The sun was setting, and Jan's ordeal had just begun. His indomitable will kept him moving forward. He began to hallucinate and saw himself taunting himself from the sidelines. Dazed, Jan stepped into the icy water. Yet, he refused to give up. The memory of his fallen comrades fueled his determination. The Germans questioned local residents if they had seen anything unusual. At that moment, Jan appeared in the distant woods, but out of hatred for the invaders, they kept silent. After the Germans left, they rushed to the woods. Jan burst through the door and, seeing food, devoured it like a madman. The two took him inside, sending the woman out to keep watch. Jan's right foot was severely damaged, but with their help, he was saved. A few days later, Jan awoke to the sound of trucks outside. This time, the colonel personally led the search. Inspecting every farm, the lieutenant colonel arrives at the warehouse where Jan is hiding. He points his pistol at the door. As the colonel was about to climb to the second level, his prized medal fell. He quickly picked it up, unknowingly sparing Jan. The family hurried to move him, working together to get Jan past the checkpoint and onto a small boat. This man was Norway's hope. They took him to a hunter's cabin, providing some supplies. It was the safest place before the Germans could find him. In the following days, Jan recovered alone. The next day, the farm faced a thorough search, but nothing was found. Jan endured the harsh conditions and his poor health in the cabin. One night, he heard voices outside. A soldier pushed open the door. But fortunately, it was just a dream. Jan cautiously checked the door, then felt relieved. However, continuous nightmares indicated Jan was on the brink of a mental breakdown. The injured toe caused him immense pain. Finally, he couldn't bear it any longer. He unwrapped the bandages, revealing the blackened, rotten toe. If not treated, it would worsen. He disinfected a knife with alcohol, bit down on a scarf, and cut off the dead toe. He stuffed the severed toe into a crevice, then fainted. After 12 days of surviving alone in this hunter's lodge, the comrades finally found a way to send him to Sweden. Jan was too weak, so they made a sled. Though it was still a tough journey, they had to get Jan to the mountaintop, where someone would meet them. After much effort, they reached the rendezvous point, but no one was there. They had to leave Jan and return before the Germans discovered them. The code was "Hello, gentlemen," but the contact didn't show up until night. They thought Jan had already reached Sweden. A man appeared, explaining they hadn't found the gentleman. It was the 4th day since they left Jan at the summit. It turned out the contact person had mistaken the location. He took someone with medical experience to find Jan again. They found the stone, cleared the snow, and there Jan was. The man blamed himself for the mishap, but to their surprise, Jan was still alive. They left some supplies and departed. 6 days later, the contact finally arrived. They braved the snowstorm. But when Jan awoke, he realized they hadn't reached Sweden. Due to the blizzard, they had to turn back. Jan was desperate. Surviving this long was a miracle. He had to get to Sweden, a neutral country, to be able to bring the information to England alive. The contact understood the urgency and promised to get him to Sweden, but with the Germans tightening border patrols, they had to wait for the right moment. From then on, different faces appeared daily to take care of Jan. His condition worsened, and he couldn't stay there any longer. As the snow melted, they acted after 17 days in the cave. The plan was to blend Jan with a migrating reindeer herd to cross the border. The best option, he set off on a sled. The German outpost was nearby, so his escorts could only take him this far. The rest was up to him. The migrating reindeer distracted the Germans. Suddenly, the sled's rope came loose. A sentry spotted the overturned sled, and Jan used all his strength to flip it back, struggling to slide down the slope and out of sight. 3 sentries came to investigate, and Jan drew his pistol with a single bullet, meant for himself. As the sentries approached, Jan placed the gun under his chin. At that moment, he felt movement beneath him. The reindeer had returned. He quickly tied the sled with a spare rope and held on tight. He fired the last bullet, startling the reindeer into running. Jan crossed the border into neutral Sweden. The colonel, upon hearing the news, despaired and walked into the ICC. The contact found Jan, and his battle was finally over. His grip on the rope was gently pried loose, one finger at a time. After 3 months of recovery, Jan personally delivered the secret documents, concluding the film. The movie is based on a true story, with most characters and events having existed. The documents weren't crucial. What mattered was the spirit of resistance. Jan's escape strikes a blow to the Germans, who claim that no one can break through their pursuit and blockade. But Jan does. He didn't fight alone, but it was the efforts of everyone along the way that made such a miracle possible. The lieutenant colonel was sentenced to death for war crimes. Jan stayed on in the army to train new recruits. He didn't consider himself a hero. Those who helped him survive were the real heroes. Until 1988. In accordance with his wishes, Jan was buried in Mandalay, the land he had fled to join those who had helped him.